The whole debate around climate change it's filled with so much anxiety and these huge, vague targets. But what if the solution wasn't just another promise, but a real, concrete engineering blueprint? Today, we're going to break down a super pragmatic plan to save the planet, one that's grounded in actual numbers, not just hopes and dreams.
So let's just start with the number that is kind of hard to even get your head around, $100 trillion. That's the estimated price tag to build everything we need. We're talking every single solar farm, every electric car, every green factory to completely decarbonize the entire globe. This isn't just some environmental issue. It's literally one of the biggest engineering projects in all of human history.
And that, of course, leads to the big question, right? When you're staring down a $100 trillion problem, is there any path forward that's, actually affordable and politically possible? The blueprint we're looking at today argues that the answer is a very clear yes.
Okay, first up, the $100 trillion problem. Before we can even talk about a solution, we really need to understand the true scale of this challenge and what that insane number actually means.
It is so important to understand the stakes behind that cost. As this quote puts it, the real danger isn't just change, it's the speed of change. When the planet changes faster than we can adapt, that's when suffering follows. So that $100 trillion, it's not just a cost, it's an investment in slowing things down and trying to avoid one crisis after another.
So where's all that money supposed to go? Well, it basically breaks down into three huge areas. The biggest slice of the pie, about 40%, is for completely overhauling our factories and agriculture. The other two massive chunks are for green electricity and replacing 1.5 billion cars, billion, with green ones. Each of those is about 30% of the total. We are talking about a complete rebuild of our global infrastructure from the ground up.
Okay, $100 trillion sounds terrifying, I get it. But let's put it into perspective for a second. If you spread that cost out over 30 years, it comes out to about 3.5% of global GDP every year. Now that's a huge number for sure, but it's not impossible. And when you weigh it against the alternative, the spiraling, long-term costs of damage from a warmer planet, it starts to look a whole lot more manageable. So, we've defined the problem, now let's get to the solution. It's called the Green Line Plan, and it's a surprisingly simple blueprint designed to cut right through all the noise and complexity. At the very heart of this entire plan is this one simple idea, the Green Line. Instead of all these chaotic last-minute policies, the Green Line proposes a steady, predictable, and totally linear path down to zero emissions. Now, why is that so important? Because it gives the entire economy, every business out there, a clear, constant signal. It lets them plan, invest, and adapt over decades without wondering what the politicians are going to do next year. And how do we actually make that green line a reality? It boils down to two simple but incredibly powerful steps. First, you pass a law that says CO2 emissions have to decrease at a constant rate. So if you want to decarbonize in 30 years, you legally require a 1/30th cut in emissions every single year. Second, and this part is crucial, you have a simple rule. All of these actions must be taken in the lowest cost order.
So, what does lowest cost order really mean? Honestly, it's just common sense. It means you pick the low-hanging fruit first. You tackle the easiest and cheapest decarbonization projects right at the start, and you only move on to the more expensive, harder stuff later. This is the absolute key to minimizing the economic pain and making the whole plan politically tough enough to actually survive for decades.
But wait a second. How do we even know which fruit is the lowest hanging? That brings us to the first essential tool we need to stick to that path. A website. The idea here is to create an open-source website that acts like a universal calculator for climate policy. So a politician proposes a new law, you plug it into the website, and it spits out the hard numbers. How much CO2 does it actually reduce, and what is the cost per ton? By making all this data public and transparent, it forces policymakers to justify their decisions and stick to that all-important lowest-cost path. It keeps everyone honest.
Now for the second tool, and this one isn't about policy, it's about innovation. Let's talk about R&D moonshots, spending a few billion now to save trillions later.
This question really gets to the heart of the whole strategy. I mean, think about it. If the total bill is $100 trillion, spending a few $100 billion on research to make green tech radically cheaper is probably the best investment humanity could possibly make. It's about spending a little bit now to save an absolute fortune later.
And hey, we have a model for this. The US government's national labs, like the Jet Propulsion Laboratory or JPL, they were created to solve these huge mission-driven challenges, like putting a rover on Mars.
The idea here is to create a similar kind of national lab, but one that is 100% focused on energy moonshots, like, cracking commercial nuclear fusion.
And what kind of moonshots are we talking about here? We're talking about concrete, game-changing projects. Imagine if R&D could deliver a universal, swappable EV battery that just eliminates charging time altogether. Or what about robots that can fully automate installing solar panels on buildings? Or the ultimate prize, commercial fusion power. These are the kinds of breakthroughs that would just fundamentally bend that cost curve way, way down.
Okay, so the engineering plan is clear, the tools are all defined, but none of that matters one bit without political will. And that brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, winning the climate war and figuring out the political path forward.
The situation is basically framed as an existential fight. On one side, you have the incredibly powerful fossil fuel industry, and they are fighting for their survival. On the other side, you have the urgent, undeniable need to decarbonize our world. Any successful plan has to be smart enough to navigate this massive conflict. And that means any law that's going to last needs support from both parties. When you really boil it down, their core demands are actually pretty simple. For Republicans, it's got to be the absolute lowest cost possible, with minimal government bureaucracy. For Democrats, it's got to be significant and verifiable carbon reductions. The political sweet spot, the only real path to a durable law, is right there with those demands overlap.
And this data is really revealing. I mean, yeah, the partisan gap is wide, no surprise there, but a pretty significant 40% of Republicans still say they're concerned about climate change. When you combine that with the overwhelming concern from Democrats, it suggests that a potential bipartisan coalition for action isn't some fantasy. The numbers are there. The real challenge is crafting a policy that can finally bridge that political divide.
And that really leaves us with the final thought. What we've looked at here is a clear, data-driven plan. The engineering is totally feasible. The economics, while they're massive, they are manageable. The political path, okay, it's narrow, but it's visible. So the ultimate variable here isn't the technology, and it's not the money. It's us. Will we be smart enough and focused enough and disciplined enough to actually do it?